Okay.
Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone. I will introduce myself. I am Sana Karazon. I have a business administration degree, and I have been working in protection and SGPP sector for over than 7 years. I am the moderator of today's event entitled Partner Not Only in Suffering, which is coordinated by StartPoint organization. First of all, I would like to welcome the speakers and attendees. And I will remind that the main language for this webinar today is English. Arabic translation is available. If you prefer the Arabic, you can choose the other channel. You can switch to the other channel, which is called Spanish. I will repeat this part to make sure that Arabic listener who join us right now can switch to the other channel. الأعزاء المتحدثين باللغة العربية واللي بيفضلوا أنه نسمعوا الندوة هي رح تكون اليوم باللغة الإنجليزية، لكن خيار ترجمة هو متاح. فيكم تختاروا القناة المسماة باللغة الإسبانية لحتى تسمعوا الندوة باللغة العربية. Let me introduce StartPoint organization. So it is a registered NGO with a mission to promote equality and social empowerment through several programs designed for women, men, and youth. StartPoint believes that change can be only achieved by exposing all of society to a message of justice and equality. StartPoint works in both the research and service sectors to promote justice and long-term change in Syria through conducting human rights monitoring, data collection, and reporting, so that the broader global community can understand better the condition in the region and believe that social awareness is key to rebuilding Syrian society. Today, we will have a talk about a research that has been conducted regarding women's participation in governing in Syria. Please let me introduce the speakers. Rasta Dai, the head of Syria Office, Embassy of Canada in Lebanon, will present the opening remarks. Ella Wind, co-author of this report, senior research associate in public wise and PhD candidate in psychology at New York University. Her dissertation focused on the cause of low rates of women employment in the Middle East and North Africa. And Noura Jizawi, co-author of this report, chairperson in StartPoint. She is a researcher at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. She focused her study on digital transnational repression, digital violence, and disinformation. I will give now the mic to Mr. Rasta to open the webinar and introduce the research. Please, Mr. Rasta.
I'm afraid that Mr. Rasta is having some technical troubles.
Really? Okay.
So we can do you want to go ahead and then when they can get access to the webinar, so we're going to give the opening remarks quite late. So sorry for that.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so
I didn't know about this.
Just start the slides. Yes.
Can you let me share screen? For some reason, it has me as participant, and I can't share this. It says host disabled share participant screen sharing.
Sorry, Ella, for interruption. Are you like having the opening remarks? Then you will start the presentation.
I'm trying. Noura, you want me to start the presentation, right?
Yeah. Let me just try to share the screen from my end.
Okay. Yeah, but let us inform the attendees that we allocated time in our agenda to answer their questions, so they can send all their questions in public or privately after the presentation.
Yes, thank you so much.
So then we can answer all their questions.
Yes.
Yalla, go ahead, Ella.
Just 1 second, it's on me. Oh, okay. I think Okay, hello, Mr. Rasta. I'm so sorry. I will promote you to a panelist, so maybe you need to rejoin. Hopefully not, but let's just try. And we've been waiting for you for the opening remarks. Okay, great. You're welcome. Hello and welcome. You are muted and we've been waiting for you for the opening remarks.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Hi,
No
everyone.
worries, it happens.
You can hear, me though. You can hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
So please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the delay. I was having some technical difficulties, which is unfortunately very common. I don't have extensive sets of remarks, but I did first want to thank the organization for the work that you've been doing. The topic is very important to us as a government in the context of Syria, in the context of Northwest Syria, but also in the context of various conflicts throughout the world. Previously I was working on Libya, and this theme was raised all the time over there. For us, you know, there's scores and scores of data on the disproportionate impact of conflict on women and on families. And what we see time and time again is that the voice of women in these conflicts are not heard. Women are not included in peace processes, and they're not included at a local level, at an international level, at an international level either. And effectively, what we as a government are trying to promote, and what we believe in strongly, is that for any kind of development or peace process, you must have the buy-in and involvement of women for them to be successful. This is kind of the central message of the government of Canada. So with this research, we're very thankful for, because this is one step towards realizing and identifying where there are gaps and where there are opportunities, of course. It was interesting to read the interest of women to participate in or be involved in kind of the legal sphere and the journalistic sphere, which at the same time are areas where women receive most or many threats, and that's something that we're very conscious of. And you know, Northwest Syria is an extremely volatile environment, obviously. But again, you know, as we say, it's just not possible to move forward without including women in these processes. So thank you for the work that you've done. I think it's the report was very interesting, actually, and we shared it around our ministry. So that information is sensibilizing, I guess you could say, or sensitizing the people that work on Syria and associated conflicts in the ministry. So those are my brief remarks, just a thank you, and to note that the topic is very relevant for us and very important moving forward. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thanks so much. And also we have to acknowledge that this research paper and the entire project was sponsored by our friends and partners in the CLFI, and particularly the Syrian office in the Canadian Embassy in Lebanon. So thank you. Go ahead, Sana.
Thank you, Mr. Rasta. So now I will move the mic to Noura and Ella to present the research paper. They have been worked during the last months.
Let me just share my screen. Sorry.
Yes, it's working.
Okay. Start the slideshow. Okay. Minimize the screen so that I can not get lost while I'm doing this. There we go. Okay. So thank you everyone again for attending the talk. Noura is going to start introducing our presentation.
Thanks everyone for being here. And hopefully this discussion will be like informative, and we would like to hear a lot from your thoughts and feedback. And so please, once we are done with the presentation, do ask a lot of questions. As you know, tomorrow marks the 11th anniversary of the Syrian Revolution, when Syrian women protested peacefully alongside the men, calling for freedom, democracy, justice, political representation, and rule of law. The unfolding of the early uprising, as we all know, eventually spiraled into a wide-ranging conflict, which has resulted in the death and displacement of millions of Syrian women, men, and children. Today, over a decade later, the 6.6 million internally displaced persons in Syria represent the largest internally displaced population in the world. While men are often the face of displaced, women and girls make up half of the displaced population of Syria. Displaced women face many of the same challenges as men, but also face distinct challenges due to their status as women. Our studies saw explore a few key questions informed by the broader academic and policy work on gender, forced migration, and governance. How does gender shape the experience of displaced women and their hosting communities? In context where a new governing institutions have emerged in a context of war and displacement, what have been women's experiences engaging with the various aspects of the public sphere? And finally, what do women themselves, which is the most important, see as their biggest challenges, and how they think various governing entities and political civil society organizations can help them ease these challenges. As you know, since 1963, Syria has been governed by one party ruled under the Ba'ath Party. In the 1973 constitution, legally, women were guaranteed the right to vote, education, work, and run for office. Still, in practice, the legal rights were contradicted by gender discrimination faced of the personal status law, nationality law, and the elderly laws. As of 2010, women composed 12.4% of the Syrian parliament, making the country 91st in the world for women's representation in lower chambers of parliament. Women were de facto highly economically disenfranchised for decades. I'm so sorry. We've been like having a lot of troubles with this phrase. For decades, Syria has had one of the lowest rates of women employment in the world. However, the authoritarian order in Syria make the political decision stolen from the public and manipulated by one party, makes the number of women in parliament meaningless. Simply to get more women elected to powerless parliament, neither empowered women nor promotes democracy. 2011 was a turning point in all aspects of Syria politics. Women emerged as key players in the Syrian uprising, especially in the nonviolent arenas of political contestation. The early protests in 2011 feature notable degree of women's participation and coordination and other critical activism areas. They took up critical roles in oppositional media, human rights, and humanitarian work. But at a higher leadership levels, women remain underrepresented. Before the conflict, Syria didn't have a national plan for the UN Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Yet the political opposition has invested some little efforts in this regard. And much less attention has been paid to women's inclusion at the national and local governance levels, such as in the Syrian interim government, for example. In general, governing bodies in the northwest Syria continue to circumvent the pressure to increase the number of women in political roles. Women are recruited as staff members in governance bodies, just to comply with the conditions of donors who fund specific projects, and they remain out of the decision-making levels. Women are often siphoned off to women's advisory boards and are relegated to stereotypically feminine ministries like education and culture. Yet, under the Islamist Syrian Salvation Government, women are actively excluded from politics and decision-making. Overall, the absence of local practical framework for women's inclusion in all levels of public affairs undermines the little progress made at the national levels. The emergent political landscape in Syria is a patchwork governance system. Domestic actors, backed by the competing external powers, hold uneasily into their respective territories. As you see on the slide, this map visualizes the distribution of areas of power governed by the de facto authorities. The northwest of Syria has become the primary receiving ground for forcibly displaced people fleeing from region formerly dominated by the opposition groups. Idlib province population doubled to more than 2.7 million, making it one of the most densely populated parts of the country. IDPs now make up to 70% of the population, according to the European Union Agency of Asylum. And more than 56% have been displaced for 5 years or more, and around half of these IDPs are women and girls. The Northwest is the largest region of Syria ruled by rebels, neither the Assad regime nor the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. It's ruled by numerous overlapping and competing institutions like the local government, the local councils, the Syrian interim government, the Syrian Salvation Government, and the complex network of civilian organizations and NGOs. And by the way, we are happy to talk more about this in details and in these different institutions in the Q&A. And now I will pass it over to Ella, who's going to talk more in details and more in depth about our research study. Over to you, Ella.
So our study focuses on women's experience in Syria's highly contested Northwest region, or in and around the province of Idlib. We engaged 127 women in this area using the combinations of surveys and focus group discussions. Our study conducted about 8 focus groups with 66 women, both IDPs and native residents, about what they thought were the most pressing issues that they faced. And we also conducted a survey with 127 women. So of those 127 women, half of them were also the focus group participants. The average age of our participants was 32, with a range from 15 to 55 years. 75% of participants were married, 3% were divorced or widowed, and 70% had children. And among those with children, they had on average 4. So we had a broad diversity of educational backgrounds and family status, but it seems roughly representative of what we would kind of expect in terms demographically from the area. And we had our participants with a wide range of origins from across Syria, as can be expected in an area where 70% are IDPs. But as you can see, still,
Ella?
Yes.
Sorry for interrupting you, but participants are saying you are very quick and the translator cannot.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I will.
So can you
yes.
please
Yes, I'll slow down. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, go on.
So our participants had a variety of origins, as can be expected in a region where 70% of residents are internally displaced people from other parts of Syria. But as you can see, still the majority are from around Idlib area. So many of them are the long-term residents. As you can see, some of them come from Kafr Takharim, where our study was held, but also from Hama, from Aleppo and rural Aleppo, from Damascus and rural Damascus, and from Homs. We asked open-ended questions in our study, in our focus groups and in our surveys. And in the range of comments that we received, 6 primary themes emerged most clearly. So first, there was the theme of women taking on the responsibilities of missing men. Second, there was the heavy burden of norms and traditions. Third, barriers to freedom of movement. Fourth, divisions between the IDPs, the displaced people, and long-term residents. Fifth, increased obstacles to obtaining an education. And 6, troubles at work. So troubles accessing work and troubles once they are participating in the workplace. So first, the responsibilities of missing men. In Syria, men have traditionally held the role of breadwinners and physical protectors, but many fathers, husbands, and brothers have been killed, disabled, or imprisoned in the conflict. And so women are suddenly confronted with a new duty of providing economically for their family. And even more difficult, many of these women have little educational background and have never worked for pay before. So this is a quote from one of our participants, Tala. I should note that all of our participants in our written report and here in our slides, the names are not their real names, obviously for security reasons. So Tala said, in the beginning, a man was present and the woman would help him. Now she is responsible for raising the kids, educating them, working, expenses. She has every type of responsibility because of the loss of her husband. But as often is the case with war, new challenges also came with new openings for women. This was expressed by Lubaba. She said, in the shadow of the war, there were women who came out and were standing with men. They were nurses and emergency medics, and they took on leadership roles. They proved themselves. In the beginning, women were rejected from society. But now, some women work in things we used to say we would never see a woman working in. So in addition to these stories of the heavy burdens borne by the conflict, many of our participants frequently took pride in overcoming immense challenges that they had been handed. Women gave us accounts of continuing education despite all odds, caring for their families, and building new lives in a new place. The next theme was norms and traditions. So the phrase norms and traditions, adat wa taqalid, was the single most spontaneously repeated phrase across respondents in all our focus groups as a challenge facing women. Women described these norms as coming from husbands, parents, and society at large. Amani said, norms and traditions are a challenge women face. You find that women desire to get out, but they do not find encouragement from their husband and their family. This prevents them from participating in all fields, such as health and education. Women aspire to engage in many fields, but there is no encouragement from those around them, so they are always restricted. And as is represented by this quote, work was one of the most frequently mentioned areas where norms and traditions narrowed the scopes of options available to our participants. And women also reported that norms of disregarding women's opinions meant that men ignored them when they spoke up about an issue. We also thought it's important to note that none of the comments from our participants explicitly linked what they saw as harmful norms and traditions to an Islamic basis. And this suggestion might be surprising, considering that many of the strongest proponents in the public sphere in Syria for excluding women from public life come from local religious institutions. But many of our devout participants argued that the anti-feminist attitudes of these official Islamist institutions were a distortion of the religion, such as Muhja, who argued that a primary barrier to women participating in governments was a lack of Islamic culture. Theme 3, barriers to freedom of movement. So the difficulty of moving freely through their locations was regularly mentioned by participants as a barrier for women in the Northwest. While these restrictions were not new to them, everyone agreed that they had become worsened by displacement. The physical infrastructure was cited repeatedly as a significant challenge imposing on women's ability to work, study, and access local political and aid institutions. So again, Lubaba explained that this lack of infrastructure subjected women to problems such as sexual harassment. She said, for the first time in my life, circumstances forced me to give private lessons. These lessons ended in the evening. I wasn't scared of that, except that cars would pass by and then stop, and the drivers would tell me, come with me. And that would only be in dark areas because I am a woman and there are no lights in that area. Next theme were divisions between internally displaced people and long-term residents. So different opinions emerged among our participants. This was kind of a contentious issue in the focus groups regarding the relative difficulties that IDPs face versus long-term residents of Sarmada and Kafr Takharim. So many IDPs complained about favoritism among the community of long-term residents of the area and that IDPs were being shut out of opportunities. So Lujain said, I have to deal with housing costs, but I do not have a source of income because of my inability to get work. Every job opening needs a wasta, which is like a connection, and a recommendation. Other participants pushed back against this view or saw the challenges of the two groups as comparable. So Maitham said, the suffering is on both sides, the displaced women and the resident women. All of us are rebuilding our lives in every way. Theme 5, increased obstacles to education. The conflict has negatively impacted educational prospects for all young people. And most obviously, there's the pressing difficulty of the physical danger of simply leaving the house and arriving at school. In some cases, schools and universities have simply shut down or been destroyed. So Lubna told us this. She said, parents have a lot of fear for their children because the area has changed. Sometimes there aren't schools nearby. There aren't universities. Additionally, financial challenges were reported by our respondents as making completing post-secondary education difficult. So before 2011, Syria had made significant progress in increasing women's access to education. So as you can see, right before the conflict in 2010, a girl in Syria could expect to have 12.5 years of schooling. And this has plummeted since the beginning of the conflict. And this has huge reaching consequences for the women in our study. So among less educated women who had managed to find white collar work in the Northwest, their lack of degrees meant that they faced additional disrespect in the workplace. And women's lack of access to education posed enormous problems in the new context where they were responsible for so much more in the home in terms of finances, in terms of finding jobs. So you can see how these themes all exacerbate each other and build on each other. The last theme that emerged were troubles at work. So participants reported that despite small numbers, women had entered into a wide variety of ever-expanding fields of work, such as business, education, engineering, and health. Yet teaching, nursing, and work in NGOs were mentioned as the fields that were most open to women. And many said that they had been pressured into those fields after being rejected from other fields that they would have preferred to work in. So also returning to the theme of freedom of movement, lack of reasonably nearby work was a significant obstacle to employment. And moreover, even when they could gain access to employment, women reported many difficulties at work. So Hanan described her experience working in a white collar job. She said, I had an experience as a school principal. Because I am a woman, there was a lot of harassment and many men envied my position. I tried to overcome it, but because of the harassment, I handed over the work equipment to the local council. I wanted to complain to the courts, but as a woman, I preferred to abandon everything and not go to court. And participants in our study explicitly and repeatedly argued that the simple fact of women's absence from specific fields, such as medicine, public administration, the judiciary, and law enforcement, had ripple effects that made all women's lives more difficult in other ways. So we're going to return to that point later in the talk, and it's also returns to kind of to this point that Hanan made about preferring to abandon everything and not going to court. Okay, so I'll return to Nora to present.
Thanks so much. So our study asked about women's experience both at active participants in politics and the public sphere, as well as the interaction with political and public institutions. Women in large part were not engaged as actors in politics, yet women's absence from the world of politics was not due to their own lack of interest. When we asked them about their interest in politics on a scale from 1 to 10, a large percentage reported a high degree of interest, and only 25% listed lack of interest as a reason for not engaging in politics. Women express resentment at the lack of representation in the crucial political decision-making, which shape their lives. referring to the negotiations between the Assad government and the Syrian opposition, which is like in the broader context, which is known as the local agreements that led to the forced displacement, collective forced displacement of the population. They just brought us, women reported that they felt that no woman had been consulted at all. They just brought us buses and said, go, as Aya said. Then she said, no, we didn't interfere in the agreements. We merely shared in the suffering. Many women reported having been discouraged from studying and working in fields relevant to the public sphere due to the cultural taboos. Law, journalism, and political science were seen as off limits to women. Widespread consensus that a lack of women employed in these fields discouraged women from accessing government services and making use of the local governing structures. As Abir argued, there is a need for female employees in the councils for the camps because of how many widows and women who have lost their men come to the council. Some of them end up not coming because of the shyness from men. Women also appear to take pride in the notable exceptions to this pattern of gender exclusion from political fields. In particular, the nomination of Dr. Huda Abbasi to the role of Minister of the SIG, Syrian Interim Government, seemed to serve as a prominent example of women who had achieved success in politics. But because she later stepped down, even her story was seen as a mixed example. Khawla said, Huda Abbasi became the Minister of Education, but because of the challenges she faced from the society, she resigned. And by the way, as an aside, we invited Dr. Abbasi to participate in the discussion, hoping that she would definitely enrich the discussion and share her experience. But unfortunately, she couldn't make it due to scheduling conflict. And you know, March is extremely busy for Syrians. And I will pass it over to you, Ella.
Thanks, Nora. So we not only were interested in women's experiences as kind of political decision makers in the public sphere, but also their experiences interacting with different governing entities, receiving services, accessing the court system. So we asked them about several different forms of different organizations that are involved in governance in the Northwest. As we mentioned, the Northwest is governed by a complicated web of competing and cooperative governing entities. So first, we asked about their experiences with the local councils. And just 19% of women reported any interaction at all with the local councils. And they had mixed experiences in terms of positive to negative experiences, but there were many reports of sexist discrimination and inaccessibility. And actually, in Kafr Tahrim, we learned that women had demanded that more women be involved in the local council in order to make it more accessible. So Jamila told us, the women in Kafr Tahrim demanded that there be a voice in a room that is a woman, and it was rejected. And the response was, by what right do you demand a seat for you in the council? But this is a natural right, as long as you're discussing matters that affect the country. Women are a part of the country. So how are you not giving us just a seat, a voice? You couldn't offer this simple thing? We asked about women's experiences with the police and the courts. So both the Syrian interim government and the Syrian Salvation Government have established judiciary systems now that are ostensibly to promote rule of law and to have a fair implementation of rules and procedures. But less than 10% of women reported having used the police and the courts. Participants saw institutions associated with criminal justice and the rule of law as essentially off limits to women, even just as citizens trying to access their services. Virtually all women argued that the lack of women employed in law, police services, and legal administration was a barrier to women using the court system. So Randa argued, As for the judiciary, we must demand the presence of a female judge or that there be assistance to the judge so that women can explain their cases comfortably. For example, on the day of my divorce, I could not explain to the judge why I wanted to divorce, and I lost my case because of that. And I should just add that losing this divorce case, this had very long-term negative consequences on Brenda's life. So this lack of being able to access justice, to be able to use the court system, we heard many stories of this having very, very negative consequences in many women's life stories since arriving in the Northwest. Next, we asked about participants' experiences with the Syrian interim government and the Syrian Salvation Government. So depending on where they are living in the Northwest, some of our participants had been living under the governance of the Syrian interim government, some had under the Syrian Salvation Government, and some who had moved had experienced both, but we just asked about both. And so 17.4% of women reported interactions with at least one of these institutions, mostly for everyday bureaucratic tasks like registering their kids for school. And actually, these institutions were viewed more favorably than most of the other institutions that we asked about in the study. Participants knew that there were women in the Syrian interim government, particularly, as we said, Dr. Al-Abbasi, and they mentioned her frequently. And support for the Islamist Syrian Salvation Government was mixed. So when there was opposition, when respondents voiced that they opposed the Syrian Salvation Government, it tended to be because of the Islamist ideology, partly because of the explicit exclusion of women from governance. And when there was support, it tended to be grounded in practical realities rather than an Islamist ideology. So these are some kind of example quotes of that. We heard from one participant who said, I support the Syrian Salvation Government just for education. Their education system here is better than in the North. And another said, I support the Salvation Government as long as they make factories so that our children aren't obligated to go somewhere else to work. So you can see these very, very practical concerns would be the reason for having a positive experience with Syrian Salvation Government, but also with the Syrian interim government, that they offered services that women were actually able to access or benefit their lives in some way. So the Syrian political opposition, and by this we mean the kind of national level opposition, which has been involved in a lot of times negotiations with international partners, with negotiations with the Assad regime. We had 11.9% of women reporting some form of interaction with the Syrian political opposition. And overall, there was a consensus around a negative evaluation of the Syrian political opposition in multiple sessions, with respondents saying that they are unelected and unaccountable to the public. We asked about the interaction with the Constitutional Committee, which is the committee that was in negotiations with the government in regards to a possible new constitution for the country. And only 4.7% reported any interaction with the Constitutional Committee. Among those who reported an interaction, they had largely positive experiences, but a large percentage of respondents were totally unaware of the Constitutional Committee's existence. So in large part, we found the Constitutional Committee was disconnected from the public on the ground in the Northwest. We asked about NGOs and civil society organizations, which really have a governing role in the Northwest because they often take up services that in another non-war, non-displacement context would be run by a government. And so it is kind of they're a bit more, I would say, in the Northwest than what an NGO is in a lot of other contexts. They often play a role as a pseudo-governing institution. Half of all participants reported some experiences interacting with NGOs. So that was our largest percentage of participants reporting interaction with one of these types of institutions. And we heard very positive experiences with NGOs across focus groups and across the survey. And the prominent presence of women as employees of NGOs was explicitly pointed to by women as a reason for their positive experiences with these institutions. we asked about the Women's Advisory Council. So 10.9% of our participants reported having some interaction with the Women's Advisory Council. And those that had interacted had mixed but leaning towards positive evaluations. But a large percentage of respondents were unaware of the Women's Council's existence. In fact, many times when we asked this question about women's experiences with the Women's Advisory Council, they said, oh, a Women's Advisory Council would be a great idea. So people are in favor of the concept of a Women's Advisory Council, but they haven't actually had the chance to even hear about it in person.
Ella, sorry for interrupting you again, but I just want to remind you that we have allocated time in our agenda for the presentation. So, but you can have for 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, we're almost done.
Yeah, great.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So last we asked about the armed groups in and around the Northwest. The vast majority of our participants reported no interaction with these groups. Overall, they had negative evaluations of the armed groups, and the feelings were especially negative when they talked about these groups having entered dense urban areas, residential areas, rather than remaining on the more rural front lines where people don't really live. We heard one very poignant and very negative account from Amira. She said that my son was with them and he was injured. No one treated him. I waited a year for them to treat him. They didn't care. They didn't help with anything. It got to the point that he died and they didn't help. So people overall in their interactions with the armed groups had very negative experiences. Okay, so I'll pass it back to Noura to talk about our recommendations from this study.
I will try to be very brief, and I'd like just to know that this is just a selected list of recommendations. For full list of recommendations, please, you can check these recommendations in our forthcoming report, and we're going to share it with you all by email. Sorry. So we have a group of recommendations to each of the stakeholders. To the local governing entities, we recommend them to encourage occupation training for women in public policy fields like law, public administration, journalism, and political science through scholarship and public awareness campaigns. Set hiring quotas for women in public administration roles. Pay special attention to infrastructure failings that limit women's freedom of movement, like lighting, clear path, publicly surveilled walkways. And finally, ensure that women are at the core of decision-making at all levels, not only as separated women's advisory board and so on, or using purely quantitative assessment that don't capture depth of input. To the civil society and NGOs, we recommend them to, sorry, I have to slow down, to conduct strategic programs for skill building relevant to women's employment and participation in the public sphere. Okay, the chat, there is like a stream of messages that the translator can't. Okay, can we just go back to the previous slide so I can repeat the recommendations?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So sorry, Ammar.
Sorry, it's taking a second to go back. Oh, okay. The local governing entities from that slide?
Yeah, I will just repeat it.
Okay.
To local governing entities to encourage occupation training for women in public policy fields like law, public administration, journalism, and political science through scholarship and public awareness campaigns. Set hiring quotas for women in public administration roles. Pay special attention to infrastructure failings that limit women's freedom of movement, like lighting, clear path, publicly surveilled walkways. And finally, ensure women are at the core of decision-making at all levels, not only as separated women's board or using purely quantitative assessment that don't capture depth of input.
move to the next one.
Yeah, the next one is for the NGOs and civil society organizations. We have these 3 recommendations: to conduct strategic programs for skill building relevant to women's employment and participation in the public sphere, design their programs based upon women's expressed needs and engage them in the planning phases of all projects, and assign a number to receive women's complaints about their organization's services or any form of abuse. And finally, to the international policymakers, to empower women to participate in all aspects of public sphere beyond women's issues and women's committees. We believe that all issues are women issues. Among domestic Syrian partners, to encourage the inclusion of women not only at the national and international levels in the policy-making process, but also at the local and municipal levels of governance as staff and decision makers. Devote more funds and attention to infrastructure needs, which affects women's essential freedom of movement. Devote more fund and attention to the cause of women and girls' education, particularly in sectors related to public affairs such as law, journalism, and public administration. Emphasize the need for a democratic transition to ensure women and all people of Syria have true political representation and accountability as part of a comprehensive roadmap to gender equality and justice. So thanks so much for listening, and please do ask questions, and we'd like to have more discussion, have more in-depth discussion with you.
Thank you, Noura. Thank you, Ella, for your
We made it on time, so please.
What?
We made it on time. We're still like...
Yeah, it's okay. Okay. It's okay. Congratulations, by the way, for this great work.
Thanks.
Okay, it is now the part of question and answers. Dear attendees, don't be hesitate to send your question. And I want to remind you, you can send them privately or even like here in the public. But personally, I have some questions for you, Ella and Noura.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, what are the challenges facing projects on women empowerment? Of course, based on the research you have been done.
Sorry, what are the challenges facing projects on women's empowerment?
Exactly.
Okay.
For example, the attitude from the community or like in the implementation. So what you saw here.
Noura, do you want to take that one?
Go ahead, and then I will go after you.
Okay. I would say one problem that we saw as we talked about in the presentation was just the simple fact of women not being as even just staff, kind of lower level bureaucratic staff in a lot of these organizations and a lot of these kind of governance bodies. So even when there were programs that women could theoretically avail themselves of, they were hesitant to do it because they feared being mocked, they feared discrimination. Some of them were not very comfortable talking with men outside of their families in depth. There are various reasons, but these fears also seemed founded because women did have stories of even trying to then access services and being rejected or being even made fun of because they were trying to do it as women. And so I think that was a really prominent outcome that we saw in the study, was that having these kind of programs available theoretically is not enough. There needs to be women working as staff in these programs in order to facilitate women in the public using them.
Thank you, Ella. Noura, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'd like to add that, as we mentioned in the beginning, that our study focused mostly on the local communities, and what we've been observing through whether through the surveys or even the focus discussions, that unfortunately, the vast majority of efforts have been paid to empower or to have women included on the national levels of politics. And unfortunately, the de facto reality of Syria in the meantime, with no horizon of a comprehensive national solution, everything now is decentralized. And I believe, and I think Ella agrees with me, that without starting from this very local context, we can't hope that as a national level, we're gonna just reach a great point where women are fully participated equally and effectively. So this is our main takeaway in this regard, that we need to focus on the local levels, and we have to have more localized frameworks of women inclusion and participation in all aspects of the governance and political institutions.
Good, thank you, Noura. I have actually another question. So after you finalize the research, what are your next steps?
I think, Noura, you should take that one, since you you're the start point chairperson.
Yeah, I feel like I have a high responsibility, but I believe that now our main takeaway is to promote these recommendations with all stakeholders on national and international level, open the discussion with all stakeholders in this regard, and hopefully and we can work together along with other partners to fill the gaps. We've been observing very practical recommendations through the stories that women shared with us, like lack of education. They have some barriers to access education, and many of them already are out of the formal academic education, but we can all of us think together how to make the informal education accessible to them, so we can be as creative as we can, but we just need to have partners in this pathway.
And I would add to that a lot of women seem to really express being open to, and this is also not just from the study, but I think seeing Syrian women in general following the conflict are very open to developing themselves in their careers, right? Like a lot of the NGO sector really opened itself up to hiring women. And many, many women in Syria who were trained as engineers, trained in, completely different fields. Noura, as an example, right? Noura was trained in Arabic literature and, worked in the NGO field after the conflict and worked in human rights. So women are ready to take on those roles, and even if they don't have the formal education, they're ready to learn and they're eager to learn. So I think a program that's kind of a post-education program to train women in public administration could be very, very successful in helping women to access that kind of work.
Yeah, I have here to share very, unfortunately, it's what's common among the Syrian men mostly. When we talk about women participation, and whenever we have candidates to fill, to be promoted to specific positions and roles, immediately they're going to ask about the expertise of these women and what kind of experience they do have. Let's be realistic. First of all, academic education will never give the person experience to serve in the public affairs. Will never, especially that in the Syrian context. I can argue that we don't have the graduate students from universities don't have any practical experience in the field. This is first. Second, serving in the public affairs absolutely doesn't need any kind of academic to be conditions by having a proper academic certificate or diploma, for instance. And above all, this question about the expertise is unfortunately being asked when it comes to women. If we want to just check the resumes of the vast majority of men in the opposition and the vast majority of men who are serving in leadership positions in all institutions, it's insane. It's insane, and there's no there's no room to make the comparison. When we talk about women participation effectively, we have all of us together as stakeholders who believe in the cause of women equality and women equity and women leadership, that we need to think together how to be creative to fill these gaps. Therefore, I believe, and we believe all together, that we can do a lot. And also, I want to encourage, I know that there's a lot of women from the local communities, which is great that they're listening to us. Don't feel like you are out or this position is not proper for you because you don't have an academic certificate. You can, definitely you can do that, and you are capable to do that. You just need some tools, some training to fill this gap. And it's the responsibility of everyone, responsibility of the civil society, responsibility of all stakeholders who believe in this cause.
Thank you, Noura, for highlighting this point. Really, it is important. We received a question here in the public. So, incredibly impressive work and so important in feeding information gaps on women's participation in Syria. As a WPS practitioner, I know that working in conflict zones and obtaining these types of information takes an immense detected level of expertise. Congrats. It's not a question. Congrats on getting this piece done. You can gather the necessary support and to address these barriers and help ameliorate the situation of Syrian women. Your success can be documented as best participate worldwide. Looking forward to seeing more. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
This is encouraging message.
That means a lot. I'd like to take the question in the Q&A from Ibrahim.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ibrahim. You made a very important point about the Dr. Abbasi in particular.
Can I read out the question, Noura, so that someone who's listening to a recording later can
that's
know it said?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So Ibrahim asked, I want to bring again the case of Dr. Abbasi, where she was highly admired by students in the Northwest region because of her exceptional efforts in the educational field at the time that she was minister. But what we faced in the Abbasi case was a lack of support from other parties to her case, where CSOs and local entities, including women, were more silent about the situation, despite that we all know that she was almost forced to resign. My question here is there any recommendation to build a community response for such cases, especially among women who were active and effective and might be very good routes for the change of response for similar cases in the future? That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, Noura, I didn't want to.
Go ahead if you have any recommendations or respond to this question, which is great.
It's a great question. It's a hard question, right? Because a lot of what we've seen in the study is also that women haven't been passively accepting to be excluded from the system. They actually, we saw with the local council in Kafr Tahrim, women came and said, why are you not having women on the council? We demand a seat here. So it's not for kind of just lack of trying that women have been pushed out. At the same time, we couldn't include every quote and every story. So we heard so many stories in our study. We also heard stories of women successfully contesting a seat at the table. And there were cases where people were able to organize and to, open that door just a little bit, just push that door a little bit more open. And I think it's just the same kind of community organizing strategies that you would see anywhere in the world, right? Bringing people together, finding where you have your points of leverage, trying to, break the silence around kind of these kinds of issues. So I don't know if there's an easy answer for how to kind of to solve these sorts of problems. But I guess I would just say that even while there's these immense challenges, I think also the study left me hopeful that there's possibilities for change from women on the ground organizing themselves and fighting for more of a seat at the table. Noura, I don't know what else, if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more. I know that, as Ella said, that women are willing to work together to organize their efforts to support each other, as a nonviolent activist, I believe that it's our secret magic that we can collectively come together to support each other. We know that Dr. Abbasi and many other women who took such leadership roles have been under a lot of pressure, security threats, smear campaigns, and so on. This is why, without having these collective support from women and civil society, from women in particular, but more broadly, men and other partners. And by the way, in StartPoint, we believe that men, our partners, are not our enemies. So we try to bring them to our side and work with them together. This kind of support would change. And somehow, this is why we believe that these kind of efforts to empower women and to have more women participated in the national levels, it must be supported, and it must be like in the shadows. And in parallel of all of these efforts on national level, we must work on the domestic and on the local communities at the same time.
Right. So actually, sorry, now that you say that, it just makes me think. I mean, we know from so many cases, right, that when any kind of group is a minority in an organization, a very small percentage, they are under a lot of pressure to conform to the majority, right? And so I think part of the issue too is when you just have one or a handful of prominent women in these kind of prominent positions, but overall you have a low percentage of women as this whole kind of local supporting municipal structures, and not only as these high-level decision makers, but as staff, as kind of lower level bureaucrats. When you have a higher percentage of women, I think that women feel more comfortable to speak out. And when one woman is kind of the only voice in the room that is a woman, I think she feels less comfortable to defend other women like Huda Abbasi. So I think that part of this idea of building up the municipal levels, building up the staff levels, the bureaucratic levels, is actually part of having this more transformational change, even at the top.
I'm so excited. I'm sorry for the interruption. I'm so excited. Khadija here with us. Yeah. She just posted in the chat box that she's from Tunisia and she's passing her support to the Syrian people. And likewise, from our side, we say hello to and much love and to all the sisters and brothers from Tunisia who inspired us as Syrians, and likewise the entire Arab Spring. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Khadija. We had also another question from anonymous attendee. Hello, wondering if the report was shared with the WPS unit at GAC.
Yeah, GAC, Global Affairs Canada. I already answered this question. We are hoping to share once we have the report finalized and published. Definitely, we're gonna distribute it worldwide, and in particular with Global Affairs Canada and with other partners who are playing a crucial role in the women empowerment in Syria in specific and around the world. And we would like to have more discussions and around it. So thank you.
Okay, here Sausan is mentioning a success story. She is saying the Syrian woman,
they prove their capacity and success in the vast majority of roles and positions they occupied including their participation in the free police. And one of the participants one of the ladies shared her story that she was working with the free police. And she mentioned a lot of positive inputs of having women in all of these positions and places. But unfortunately, the community around her unfortunately, the community is fighting women and discouraging them and pushing them out of these public spheres. I don't know if my translation is proper and good, but I'm just trying. I'm not a professional translator, so I'm just trying to do my best.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And this too. Another question, like regarding the participation of like men and youth. How do you engage the men and youth in your program to support women's rights?
So again, is this question to me?
And like,
don't make it so hard. Yeah.
But yeah. You used to do that in like Start Point. So usually what you are doing too.
You know, since Start Point has been working and operating in the field for more than 7 years. And yeah, we always have these discussions. We always include men and young men in all of these sessions and discussions around, not only around their issues, but also around the women issues. For instance, we've been working on the violence against women in detention, and including the sexual-based violence. And we had a lot of incredible discussions with the men and youth in this regard. So we hope that through this work, we can expand the spectrum of our allies instead of considering them as out, because we believe that they definitely would be in our side and would be absolutely one of our stakeholders.
If I could add something I found very interesting in a lot of the comments around adat and taqalid, which we heard this phrase. I mean, when we were coding these interviews, it was incredible how many times people brought up this phrase spontaneously in every focus group, in every survey. But a lot of our participants also expressed that it was not just men that were imposing those on women, but actually women. And in some cases, we heard stories where someone's mother would not let her study something like law or journalism or to work in a public-facing field. And actually that it was her father who supported her and kind of pushed back and gave her the space to be able to pursue that she wanted to pursue. So I would also say it's not only, it's not something where just men are enforcing kind of these norms and traditions, but sometimes women are, many times men are the ones pushing back to try to create space for women. So I think that shows that there are a lot of possibilities also for men to be supporters of women and to help advance equality in the region.
Yes. We have here a recommendation from Azad. Azad is saying like we have in Syria 4 governments and most of them like are similar, like in dealing with the women issues. He recommended here, like, that like he mentioned also that the women like are suffering from discrimination, and it is important to open this type of clinic as a consultant in the personal issues and the rights. Feel worth it? What it was like worth it? Like some legal clinic.
Yeah, heritage and
heritage. Yeah.
Yeah, and child custody. Yeah. Thanks, Ibrahim.
Thank you, Azad. What are the most responsibilities from the NGOs?
I think Riyadh has already posted very good answer to your question, Sana. So.
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is answering.
Yeah, it's definitely more awareness, as Riyadh said, and build the capacity of women to participate more and to play leadership roles in the public spheres, and also raise the awareness of the community for the about the need for women participation in all of these public spheres, and to have to support the justice and pay the attention of decision makers and partners, local and international partners, to the importance of women participation in the public spheres and in leadership roles through the advocacy. And yeah, Riyadh, I totally agree with you. I echo your opinion about having women in the as just like to appear by any party, whether by the regime prior to the 2011 and until this moment, or other political parties or other governance entities inside Syria or outside of Syria, having women just to play the role of or to appear as modern, secular, and so on. So it's not acceptable, because women definitely must be change makers and must be in the core of decision making. I echo your point, and I totally agree with you. Thanks so much for raising this point.
Because of the time, if there is no comments or questions, I will conclude the part of question and answers with this question. Actually, based on your experience and finalizing or writing the research, what are your recommendations for the other researchers who are doing similar work?
I would say something that was very useful in our study was keeping it very, very open-ended. We tried really to not impose any previous ideas about what women's issues were, whether or not they had good experiences in politics, whether or not they were interested in politics. We tried as much as possible to design the study to really just give a space to hear their voices and their opinions, and to not impose as much as we could very, very limited assumptions about anything, and just let the data speak. And I think that was really useful in the end, that we found these results that we weren't necessarily expecting, that were very we hadn't heard before in other studies.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Noura.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's a kind of acknowledgement, but also it's super important to highlight this point. This study would never be happen without the amazing efforts of women and men who collected the data on the ground. For some reasons, I can't share their names in the meantime, but my recommendation to all researchers who are willing to conduct such kind of research in the future: train the local, train the community, train local researchers to handle properly this kind of research, because the more they are trained, the more proper data you will get, and the more proper recommendations you will end up with. Otherwise, I've been observing a lot of some kind of improper methods in collecting the data, and sometimes there is a lack of inclusion. There's no understanding by many researchers about what kind of challenges, lack of women accessibility to devices and internet, the huge amount of Syrian population. And by the way, we have, hopefully in the coming month, we're going to release another report on the women accessibility in the northwest of Syria, women accessibility to devices and internet. and how much they can use it for such purposes. Unfortunately, many people who are out of Syria, they assume that the Syrian people, in particular the population, the IDPs in the Northwest and in other areas, have the same privilege of accessibility to internet and devices. And, you know, we've been through that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when many organizations and unfortunately donors were saying, yeah, just move to Zoom and online sessions. There's no need to keep conducting sessions in the centers. And then here the big question, how really people do assume that by default, these people who are in the most vulnerable IDP camps, the most vulnerable population, would have the privilege to have access to internet and devices and to participate in Zoom sessions and in any kind of online training, unless we offer these technology and internet to them, unless we made them online, we support them to be online. And as you see, there's a lot of barriers like transportation, like it's not that easy. And I believe that our responsibility as social scientists, all of us, to listen to the most vulnerable people on the ground. It's easy to conduct a study with the people who are already empowered, but our purpose is to listen to the most vulnerable women and men on the ground, and to set our recommendations based on their recommendations and to meet their own needs.
I would just add, some of the researchers who were on the ground who helped collect the data for this study, we trained them before the study, and some of them, this was their first study that they had collected data for. And the work that they did was amazing. The transcripts were incredible. The quality of the work that they provided was just so high. And just to return to that point before that Noura was making about people being eager and capable and, you know, very open to being trained in new skills and excelling in those skills. So I was just really, really impressed with all of the researchers that helped us with this project. They just did an incredible job. And the fact that some of them, it was their first research project that they had done, it was just really astounding work.
So proud of you all. Great shout out. I'm afraid that we are running out of time.
Unfortunately, we have like a limited time. So we reached the end of the discussion. But I like Mr. Rasta, Noura, and Ella, if you would like to add anything as a conclusion, you can have 5 minutes.
I don't know if I have anything to add beyond what we've said. I think, yeah, it's I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of this project from what we've learned, and, you know, new initiatives that could be launched and new creative ways to think about how to help women access, you know, the rights, the things that the programs that they should be able to avail themselves of, and positions that they should be able to be in terms of decision making. I really hope that this study is going to be able to kind of open the door to new strategies to think about how to achieve that.
I hope so. So, Noura?
I have nothing to add. Thanks so much. And hopefully this is going to be just the first step in this regard. And we are hoping definitely to see and to be able, hopefully in the future, to conduct further research to understand the other local communities and move forward in this regard. So the final word, hopefully, is going to be to Mr. Rasta.
Mr. Rasta.
Yes, hi. So first, thank you for this extremely intriguing conversation. And just to address the question, also, I will be sending a message right after this call to our WPS colleagues in Ottawa. It's a good opportunity, I think, for them also to be a little more tuned to what's happening in the Syria case. So just to, kind of address that question of earlier, it's definitely we will share this with colleagues that not just work on WPS in the WPS division, but also Syria colleagues as well. So range of different divisions that touch on Syria or work directly on Syria are going to be are going to be aware of the report, and then these things tend to kickstart conversations, which is helpful and very important. So just for information, thank you very much all for your time.
Thanks so much for being here. Thank you.
Yeah, really. I would like to say that the journey of women's struggle is long and difficult. In order to meet the goals, this requires a lot of effort and, of course, support. This research and discussion is a great start. We hope that it will be the beginning and lead to a wider work, inshallah. Thank you for your time, and it is nice to see you all.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.